All right, Lou Reyes was the head of the presidential personnel at the end of President George W. Bush's administration. He's also a partner with Ashcroft, Sutton and Reyes law firm, and we welcome him to our program right now. And we want to talk about the complexities of the presidential transition, because you are in charge of a major transition, and it is something that fascinates so many of us, because a transition that has to happen within a set amount of time, a short amount of time between now and January. And I would like to ask you, in terms of the scope of the challenge, how you would describe it.
Well, thanks for having me. The scope of the challenge is as critical as it could be, quite honestly. I mean, we're talking about the peaceful transition of power in the most powerful nation in the world, and doing it within 70 days. And the number one challenge that you have to understand as a president-elect is that this is really a matter of national security. We're talking about historically a vulnerable time for the United States during a transition. We've had major incidents like 9/11, the World Trade Center bombings, even going all the way back to the Bay of Pigs. These all happened within 270 days of a president assuming office. So the challenge is to get your leadership together, identified, and then in place, hopefully very soon after you have been sworn in as president.
It is said that your team set the gold standard for transitions, that this is something that a lot of people say is really one to behold, because you folks really worked early, and you worked hard to ensure that this was going to be a smooth one for the Obama administration.
Well, I'm a little biased, but I do think, and President Obama said it the other day, that the Bush transition and the Bush team was very professional and of course, graceful, even gracious is what I think the word he used. But it was a lot more than that. It was President Bush, he challenged us and basically told us to put on the best transition of all time, which is something we wanted to achieve. And so we started early. You know, late spring, the meetings began internally and throughout the agencies, the cabinet and the sub-cabinet. And by the time that the president, or at least the nominees, had been decided upon in the conventions, we were reaching out to both sides. We were beginning clearances of potential cabinet members before the election. And by the time President Obama had been elected, we were already in long-standing conversations and providing, really, I think, what was unprecedented access to the inner workings of the White House and the things that the president-elect needs in order to hit the ground running on January 20th.
I think it's really important that you point out that this all began much earlier, months ago, because people may be thinking that what they're seeing right now by the images that we've been showing over the course of today and this week of Mr. Trump meeting with different candidates for different positions, that this is where it begins. But no, it has begun. It began months ago, this preparation, and that both candidates on the Democratic and the Republican side, they had transition teams in place working hard just in case their side happened to win.
Correct. There's certain legislation that allows for presidential nominees to go ahead and start engaging in background checks and clearance checks for certain individuals that they are intending to potentially nominate. You know, all of those clearance checks, it doesn't mean that all things were decided before the election, but the process certainly would have begun. Now, there's nuances in the process. Sometimes a candidate may not get through the clearance process, and then another candidate needs to start that process. So, but the point was, in the past, especially before the Bush administration, those clearances were starting after the election, and now they definitely do start before.
I have just a couple of seconds, but I want to ask you on a personal note, what was the most surprising thing for you as head of this transition team in this effort?
Well, as far as the outgoing transition, it really was, I guess if I had to put one thing, it's the scope, really, of what has to happen in 70 days. And again, we're talking about filling, the most critical positions, or at least having the president-elect come in and fill those start deciding on, and then hopefully filling those positions for the good of the country within 100 days. And we're talking about 100, 150 positions. So the scope of that and the clearances and the work involved and the pace and the stakes were definitely, you know, striking. And then the other thing I think I would hate to fail to mention is there was a lot of collegiality with the Barack Obama's administration, and we worked very well together. They came in, it was very professional, and all for country first.
That's wonderful, and it all appears to be so seamless. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.